Have you ever stood inside one of those vast, ancient cathedrals and just let your eyes wander across the walls? Those towering stone structures, with their intricate carvings and breathtaking stained glass, often feel like frozen moments in time, places of quiet reverence and overwhelming beauty. But what if I told you that many of those beautiful details aren't just random decorations or purely religious symbols? What if, hidden in plain sight, there's a secret language carved into the very stones, a silent code used for centuries to track power, bloodlines, and social standing? This is the story of the stone passwords, a sophisticated system of symbols, marks, and emblems that noble families and guilds used to embed their identity into the architecture of the Middle Ages. These weren't just vanity projects or artistic flourishes. They were deliberate, strategic acts of recording, a way to say, "We were here, we built this. We matter." In a time long before digital records or official certificates, these symbols acted as living records, tracking ancestry, affirming authority, and sometimes even granting access to hidden knowledge or spaces within the church. They turned cathedrals into more than just houses of worship. They became archives of influence, written not on parchment but in stone. Today, we're going to unravel that mystery together. We'll explore how these hidden marks shaped the political and social landscapes of their time, and how echoes of this practice still influence the way we think about heritage, identity, and power today. By the end of this video, you won't look at medieval cathedrals the same way again. You might even find yourself searching for these silent stories the next time you walk through history. So come with me, let's step back in time, decode the stones, and listen to what they've been trying to tell us all along. To truly grasp why these intricate symbols were painstakingly carved into the very fabric of medieval cathedrals, we need to step into a completely different world, a world where the vast majority of people could not read or write. In this context, images weren't just decoration, they were a primary language. A soaring stained glass window illustrating a biblical parable wasn't merely beautiful, it was a sermon in light and color. A fearsome gargoyle wasn't just a waterspout, it was a stone guardian against evil spirits. This reliance on visual storytelling meant that every carving, every statue, and every symbol was loaded with meaning, designed to communicate complex ideas about faith, power, and one's place in the universe to everyone, from the most educated bishop to the humblest peasant. This visual language became the perfect medium for the wealthy and powerful to cement their legacy. Noble families and high-ranking clergy who funded these monumental building projects saw them as the ultimate combination of piety and politics. By commissioning a chapel, a window, or an entire facade, they were performing a very public act of devotion, hoping to secure their place in heaven. But they were also securing their place in history, ensuring their name and lineage would be remembered for centuries. They needed skilled artisans to bring their vision to life, and this is where the stonemasons come in. These were not simple laborers, they were highly trained artists and engineers, often organized into powerful guilds that guarded their techniques and knowledge as closely as any state secret. Under the direction of their patrons, these masons became the scribes of this stone language. The symbols they carved were a fusion of these two worlds, the sacred intentions of the church and the secular ambitions of the patron. A noble family's coat of arms might be subtly integrated into the border of a scene depicting the Last Judgment, visually arguing for their divine right to rule. A bishop's personal symbol might be nestled among the carvings of saints, linking his authority directly to heavenly endorsement. even the simpler, geometric mason's marks, often thought of as just signatures, spoke to a system of quality control and artisan pride, creating a hidden record of the hands that did the work. From these humble marks to grand heraldic beasts, each chisel stroke told a dual story, one of faith for all to see, and one of family, power, and identity for those who knew how to look. This sophisticated blending of the spiritual and the worldly laid the essential groundwork for a covert, stone-based network of information that would track influence and ancestry long after the patrons and masons themselves were gone. Walking through the nave of a medieval cathedral, your gaze might first be drawn to the obvious, the soaring arches, the radiant windows. But if you look closer at the capitals of columns, the bosses of vaults, or the frames of doorways, you'll start to notice a quieter, more intricate story waiting to be read. This is where the language of stone truly comes to life, a visual vocabulary where every creature, every flower, and every geometric shape was chosen with profound intention. Among the most powerful symbols were heraldic beasts and devices, the medieval equivalent of a family logo and mission statement combined. A lion, frequently seen carved into choir stalls or guarding tombs, wasn't just a lion. It was a bold declaration of courage, authority, and royal command. An eagle, often perched high on a lectern, symbolized imperial power and a connection to divine vision, suggesting the patron family's lofty status and far-reaching influence. Then there's the fleur-de-lis, the iconic stylized lily. While it later became synonymous with French monarchy, its widespread use spoke a universal language of purity, light, and divine right to rule. The placement of these symbols was never accidental. A noble family's crest positioned near the high altar wasn't just a boast, it was a strategic claim to territory, both earthly and heavenly, signaling to all visitors that their patronage had secured them a prime location in the house of God. But not every mark was so grand or public. Scattered throughout the masonry, often in less conspicuous places, are the humble mason's marks. These are not symbols of dynastic ambition, but signatures of individual artistry. Think of them as a stoneworker's personal brand, a simple geometric design, a pentagram, a set of intersecting lines, a unique loop, chiseled into a block to identify their work for quality control and payment. Yet, even these practical marks held deeper meaning. They spoke of guild affiliations, a network of skilled craftsmen who guarded their techniques and passed this symbolic shorthand down through apprenticeships. Finding a specific mason's mark in multiple cathedrals can trace the journey of a single artisan or workshop across the country, mapping a hidden network of talent and trade. Perhaps the most fascinating symbols are those that blend the sacred and the secular into an inseparable whole. It was common for a pious noble family to intertwine their heraldic emblem with a potent religious symbol, creating a powerful public relations message in stone. Imagine a shield bearing a family's griffin, but it's being presented by a carved saint on a pillar, or a scene of the Lamb of God, a universal symbol of Christ's sacrifice, surrounded by a border of oak leaves and acorns, the personal badge of a local lord. This fusion was a masterful way to imply divine endorsement of their temporal power. It visually argued that their wealth and authority were not just inherited, but were blessed and sanctioned by heaven itself. Even patterns we might dismiss as purely decorative were often laden with meaning. Intricate knotwork, Celtic spirals, and interlocking rings that weave across stone surfaces are more than just beautiful designs. In a world without end, these endless loops symbolized eternity, the immortal soul, and the interconnected bonds of a family lineage, a visual promise that their line would continue unbroken. A simple rose, for instance, could be a direct reference to a house like the English Tudor family, but its number of petals or its state of bloom could indicate a specific generation or marital alliance. The next time you find yourself in a historic space, look closely at what appears to be mere decoration. You might be staring directly at a centuries-old family tree, a contract, or a prayer, all encoded in the silent, enduring language of stone. Constructing a cathedral was arguably the single most expensive undertaking of the entire medieval era, a project so vast it could drain the treasury of a kingdom and span multiple human lifetimes. Who could possibly fund such an endeavor? The answer lies with a powerful class of patrons, kings, queens, powerful bishops, and the wealthiest noble families. For them, financing a cathedral was not merely an act of devotion. It was the ultimate strategic investment, a way to display immense piety while simultaneously cementing their family's legacy in stone and mortar for all eternity. This system of patronage was the engine that drove cathedral construction, and it came with very specific, non-negotiable conditions. In exchange for their colossal financial outlay, these patrons demanded a permanent, public acknowledgement of their generosity. This was far more than a simple, sponsored by plaque. They negotiated for their personal and familial symbols, their coats of arms, heraldic beasts, and personal emblems, to be intricately woven into the very fabric of the building. A wealthy duke might fund an entire chapel, and in return, every vault boss, every stained glass panel, and every carved pew end within that space would bear his family's distinctive mark. This practice effectively turned entire sections of the cathedral into a personalized gallery, a stone-bound declaration of that family's power, piety, and permanence. The sacred space became a living record of dynastic ambition, where the history of local power could be literally read off the walls by anyone who understood the visual language of heraldry. Consider the pervasive influence of the Plantagenet dynasty across England. Their distinctive symbol, 3 golden lions passant on a red field, appears repeatedly in cathedrals from Durham to Winchester. This wasn't a coincidence or a simple expression of national pride. It was a calculated assertion of ownership and authority. By placing their emblem in these sacred spaces, the Plantagenets were visually claiming a divine endorsement of their rule, reminding every bishop, baron, and commoner who entered exactly who held the ultimate power in the realm. Their financial patronage bought them a permanent seat at the heavenly table and a powerful tool for earthly propaganda. But this was about more than just vanity or flamboyant displays of wealth. In the fiercely competitive and often volatile world of medieval politics, these carved symbols were crucial tools for maintaining social status and political clout. A prominently placed family crest served as a constant reminder of a patron's resources and influence, a silent warning to rivals and a reassurance to allies. It could help secure marriages, forge alliances, and legitimize a family's claim to titles and lands. The cathedral itself became a neutral, sacred ground where these silent claims of status were publicly displayed, and by their very presence in a church, implicitly sanctioned by God. This network of patronage created a hidden ledger, a stone-carved database of who funded what, who owed whom, and which families truly held sway in the region. It was a complex language of influence waiting to be read by those literate in the code of symbols, setting the stage for these very emblems to function in even more intriguing ways. Now, think about the function of a password in our own digital age. It's a key that unlocks access, confirms identity, or verifies membership in a select group. In much the same way, these stone-carved symbols acted as visual passwords throughout the medieval world. In a society where the vast majority of the population couldn't read, visual cues weren't just helpful. They were essential for navigating complex social and spatial hierarchies. A specific emblem carved beside a particular door might signal to those in the know that this entrance led to a private family chapel, or that a certain crypt was reserved for a specific lineage. It was a silent, permanent access code etched into the architecture itself. This system of recognition extended deeply into the professional world of the craftsmen. Masons' marks, those seemingly simple geometric signatures, functioned as a guild's internal password system. When a master mason arrived at a new building site, he could examine the stonework and immediately identify the hands that had shaped it, recognizing the marks of his own apprentices or the signature style of a rival workshop. This wasn't just about pride, it was about quality control, payment, and professional trust. A specific mark guaranteed a standard of workmanship, creating an unspoken bond of quality among initiates of the craft. It was a way of saying, one of us did this and it meets our shared standards, turning the entire cathedral into a public resume and a network of verified excellence. During times of war, rebellion, or political intrigue, these symbols took on an even more urgent, covert role. A cathedral was often one of the few stable, permanent structures in a medieval town, making it a natural meeting point and a safe haven. A noble family opposed to the crown might use a subtly altered version of their standard crest, perhaps a lion facing the wrong direction or a flower missing a petal, carved near a confessional booth to discreetly signal a place where messages could be left or where allies could find sanctuary. For those fleeing persecution, spotting the correct symbol could mean the difference between safety and capture. This transformed the bustling, public space of the cathedral into a labyrinth of hidden messages, where only those with the right visual key could navigate the secrets hidden in plain sight. Perhaps the most tantalizing possibility is that these symbols pointed to physical secrets within the building itself. We know that cathedrals often had hidden chambers for safeguarding relics and treasury during raids, or for priests to retreat in times of danger. A specific sequence of symbols, like a particular arrangement of 3 knots or a unique floral pattern repeated along a ledge, might have served as a map for trusted individuals, guiding them to a concealed door or a locked chest containing important documents. This password-like function elevates the symbols from mere decoration to an integral part of the cathedral's security and operational design. They were the medieval equivalent of a combination lock, their code known only to a select few, ensuring that the most valuable assets, both material and genealogical, remained protected for generations. But how exactly did a simple symbol evolve over time to tell such a complex story? Think of it like a family tree, but one carved in stone for all to see. A noble family's coat of arms was never a static logo. It was a living document. With each new generation, strategic marriage, or military conquest, the emblem would be subtly updated to reflect these changes. A knight's simple shield might be divided into quarters, known as quartering, to visually represent the union of 2 powerful houses through marriage. The addition of a small border, a change in the color of a lion's tongue, or the introduction of a new charge like a star or a crescent moon could denote a specific heir, a younger son branching out to claim new lands, or a hard-won victory that expanded the family's territory. These weren't arbitrary changes, they followed the strict, formal rules of heraldry, a language that was universally understood by the medieval elite. This allowed anyone literate in this visual code to instantly read the history of a family simply by looking at their latest emblem, understanding their alliances, their claims, and their standing at a single glance. This evolutionary process is beautifully visible in cathedrals that were constructed over many decades, acting as a timeline frozen in stone. In a place like Chartres Cathedral, you can literally walk through history. The earlier sections, perhaps the crypt or the western facade, might display the original, simpler arms of a local count. As you move into the nave, built a generation later, that same symbol might now be impaled with the arms of his powerful wife, a duchess from a neighboring region. Finally, in the magnificent choir stalls added decades later, the shield could be grandly quartered, incorporating the emblems of 4 great families, telling a story of cunning marriages that had, over a century, elevated that original count's descendants to the highest echelons of power. Each addition to the cathedral's architecture provided a new page in this stone-bound genealogy, a permanent and public claim to a lineage that could be verified by royal heralds and challenged by jealous rivals. This public display was crucial. In an era before centralized record-keeping, a family's claim to land and title could be disputed. A rival might produce a forged parchment, but it was far more difficult to argue with a coat of arms that had been proudly carved over the entrance to a chapel for 50 years, witnessed by thousands. These symbols acted as a form of legal advertising, a constant, undeniable assertion of identity and right. They ensured that power and prestige were not just inherited but were visually perpetuated, creating an unbroken chain of identity that stretched from the past into the present and was projected far into the future. This meticulous maintenance of symbolic identity turned the cathedral walls into a sanctioned and sanctified archive, a stone-based genealogy that was both a family's greatest pride and its most powerful weapon. To see this system of stone passwords in its full, breathtaking detail, we need to travel to the heart of France, to the magnificent Bourges Cathedral. Here, the theory we've been exploring finds its perfect, living proof in the story of one man, Jean de France, the Duke of Berry. As the son, brother, and uncle of successive kings of France, the Duke was among the wealthiest and most powerful nobles of his age, a true prince of the realm. And like many men of immense power, he was consumed by a passion for collecting not just jewels and books, but also the one thing that truly lasts, a legacy cemented in art and architecture. Bourges Cathedral became one of his most ambitious projects, and he left his mark upon it in a way that is both blatant and beautifully subtle, turning the entire structure into a vast autobiography in glass and stone. His personal emblems are the key to reading this story. Throughout the cathedral, you will find 2 creatures repeated with almost obsessive frequency, the bear and the swan. At first glance, they might seem like whimsical choices, but in the coded language of medieval symbolism, they were anything but. The bear, or ours in French, was a playful pun on his home Duchy of Orleans, a classic example of how these symbols often worked on multiple levels of meaning. But it also represented strength, sovereignty, and a fierce protective nature. The swan, a creature of purity and grace, was famously associated with knightly virtue and may also have honored his wife, Jean de Boulogne. Together, these animals weren't just his mascots, they were a branded message about his character, his lineage, and his right to rule. You find them everywhere, peeking out from the intricate stone tracery of the choir stalls, woven into the vibrant narratives of the stained glass windows, even carved into the very bosses of the vaulted ceilings high above. Every single appearance was a deliberate, paid-for declaration. Jean was here, Jean made this possible. This wasn't charitable donation in the modern sense, it was a transaction with heaven and earth. By funding the construction and glorification of this sacred space, the Duke was performing a very public act of piety, banking spiritual credit for his soul's salvation. Simultaneously, he was engaging in the most sophisticated kind of political advertising. In a time of constant war and shifting alliances, like the bloody 100 Years' War that raged during his lifetime, visibly embedding your identity into the most important building in a region was a powerful act of control. It reminded the local bishops, the rival nobles, and every common citizen who entered to pray that their ultimate allegiance, both spiritual and temporal, was owed to the House of Berry. The cathedral became a permanent billboard for his dynasty's power, ensuring that his influence would be felt long after his death. And we can't forget the other set of marks that tell this story, the Masons' marks. Scattered throughout the stonework, particularly in the exquisite choir stalls, are the unique geometric signatures of the master craftsmen the Duke employed. These marks are the fingerprints of genius artisans like André Bonnevue, a famed sculptor personally commissioned by the Duke. Finding Bonnevue's specific mark in Burgess is like discovering the signature of a Renaissance master on a painting. It directly links the highest quality artistry to the patronage of a specific, discerning individual. The Duke wasn't just funding a building, he was curating a masterpiece, and he ensured that the very best hands were hired for the job. This collaboration between wealthy patron and brilliant artisan is captured perfectly in these two layers of symbols, the grand heraldic beasts of the Duke and the humble geometric scratches of the Masons, one speaking of power and the other of craft, forever intertwined in the soul of the cathedral. The story of Burgess shows us that these stone passwords were deeply personal, transforming a public sanctuary into a private gallery of one man's ambition, faith, and impeccable taste. While these stone passwords brilliantly tracked the comings and goings of generations, they were also wielded as active weapons in the political arena. The cathedral was not a neutral gallery. It was a contested space, a silent battleground where rival families and warring nations fought for visual dominance, using symbols as their ammunition. In times of peace, this competition played out through strategic donations. A wealthier family might fund a spectacular new rose window simply to ensure their crest was positioned more prominently than their rivals above the main entrance. This was spiritual one-upmanship, a way to publicly outpious a competitor and claim a closer proximity to the divine, and by extension to earthly power. But during periods of open conflict or a disputed succession, the symbolism turned far more aggressive and deliberate. Following a military victory, the winning side would often engage in a form of architectural colonization. They would literally carve their triumph into the very walls of the conquered region's most sacred spaces. A stark example of this is found in Scotland after key English victories, where the royal arms of England were systematically added to Scottish cathedrals like St. Giles in Edinburgh or Dunfermline Abbey. This was not a respectful addition, it was a calculated act of psychological domination. Every time a Scottish worshipper entered to pray, they were met with the enduring symbol of their subjugation, a permanent reminder of who now held ultimate authority. The cathedral, meant to be a universal house of God, was forced to serve as a billboard for foreign rule. Yet the oppressed were not without their own methods of silent resistance. Losing factions and local lords developed a sophisticated language of subtle rebellion. If they couldn't remove the victor's symbols, they could undermine them. A stonemason sympathetic to the local cause might carve a victorious king's lion, but perhaps give it averted eyes, a sign of shame or avoidance in medieval iconography. A defiant local flower might be woven into the border surrounding the imposed emblem, slowly strangling it. In some cases, older, scrubbed-out symbols of a deposed family would be secretly recut under cover of night, a faint but powerful ghost of the previous order lingering just beneath the surface. These acts required immense courage and were a testament to how deeply these stone messages were felt. They were a way to maintain identity and hope, whispering of resistance in a space that otherwise shouted of conquest. This transformed the entire cathedral into a complex palimpsest of power, a parchment where old messages were scrubbed away and new ones written over them, but where traces of the past always remained for those who knew how to look. A single wall could tell the story of 100 years of conflict. An original Norman arch with its simple geometric patterns, later overlain with the flamboyant heraldry of a Plantagenet king, which itself was subtly altered after a Tudor victory. These silent stone narratives were understood perfectly by the medieval elite. For them, reading a cathedral's walls was like reading a court circular or a diplomatic dispatch. It revealed the latest alliances, the current victors, and the lingering grudges. This political dimension elevates the symbols from mere records of ancestry to active, powerful tools in the endless Game of Thrones, proving that the most enduring battles are sometimes fought not with swords, but with chisels. Behind every noble patron's grand vision and every intricate symbol carved into the stone, there stood a highly organized and remarkably powerful force, the medieval stonemason guilds. To think of these groups as simple trade unions or early construction companies would be a profound underestimation. They were, in truth, something closer to a combination of a modern-day elite university, a top-secret research and development lab, and a fiercely protective professional organization, all rolled into one. Their most precious commodity wasn't stone or mortar, but knowledge, esoteric, hard-won knowledge about geometry, engineering, and most importantly for our story, the symbolic language of stone passwords. This knowledge was their power, and they guarded it with immense care. The entire structure of a guild was designed to protect and perpetuate its secrets through a rigid system of apprenticeships that could span over a decade. A young boy entering as an apprentice would spend years performing the most basic tasks, slowly earning the trust of the master craftsman. As he progressed to journeyman, he would be entrusted with more complex work and gradually introduced to the guild's deeper mysteries. Only upon creating a true masterpiece of his own design would he be judged worthy of the title of Master Mason. It was at this highest level that the full symbolic lexicon was revealed. A master would learn not just how to carve a specific heraldic beast, but why it was used, what its variations meant, and how to integrate it with other symbols to convey complex messages of lineage and alliance. This ensured that the ability to correctly interpret and execute these symbols remained exclusively within the guild, creating a closed loop of expertise that guaranteed their continued employment on the most prestigious and lucrative cathedral projects. The most tangible evidence of this system is found in the countless masons' marks scattered throughout every medieval cathedral. These are not the grand symbols of nobility, but the humble, personal signatures of the artisans themselves. Often simple, a set of intersecting lines, a unique knot, a small compass or star, these marks were chiseled into a finished stone block before it was hoisted into place. While their primary function was practical, acting as a way for the guild's wardens to measure an individual's output for payment, they were far more than just time cards. Each mark was a unique identifier, a brand of quality that said, "I crafted this and it meets the exacting standards of my guild." Finding the same mark in cathedrals hundreds of miles apart allows historians to trace the migratory paths of these highly skilled journeymen, mapping a hidden network of talent that stretched across Europe. In some cases, these simple geometric shapes may have held even deeper coded meanings. The specific angle of a line or the number of points on a star could potentially indicate an artisan's rank within the guild hierarchy, the specific lodge he hailed from, or even the year a particular section was completed, turning a simple signature into a multi-layered data point. This system made the guilds the indispensable intermediaries between the lofty ambitions of the noble patrons and the physical reality of the cathedral. A duke might demand his bear and swan be displayed prominently, but it was the master mason who knew the precise proportions, the ideal stone, and the most sacred geometry to make that symbol resonate with power and meaning. They were the living libraries of this symbolic code, the translators who turned a patron's desire for immortality into an enduring language of stone. Their crucial role reminds us that the story of medieval power isn't just about kings and queens. It was also about the immense, quiet influence of the supremely skilled craftsmen who literally held the tools to build their legacy. This blending of the sacred and the secular, known as syncretism, is where the stone passwords reveal their most sophisticated and audacious layer. The patrons funding these cathedrals were walking a delicate tightrope. On one hand, they needed to demonstrate profound, unquestionable piety to their God and their community. On the other, they had a very earthly desire to cement their family's name and authority into the annals of history. The solution was a masterstroke of medieval public relations. They didn't just place their symbols in the church. They intricately wove them into the very fabric of its sacred imagery, creating a powerful visual argument that their right to rule was not just inherited but divinely ordained. Consider the scene of the Last Judgment, a terrifying and ubiquitous depiction carved over the main portals of countless cathedrals. Here, Christ sits in majesty, dividing the saved from the damned. It's the most momentous event in Christian theology. Now, imagine a noble family's heraldic beast, a lion or a griffin, carved not off to the side, but right there amidst the blessed souls being welcomed into heaven. The message to every peasant, merchant, and rival noble entering the church was breathtakingly clear. Our family is not merely of this world, we have a reserved seat in the next. Our power is endorsed by heaven itself. This was the ultimate legitimization, turning a political claim into a theological certainty. This strategy extended to the veneration of saints. Many noble families would choose a patron saint associated with their region or their family's legendary history. They would then fund a chapel, an altar, or a stunning stained glass window dedicated to that saint. But the artwork wouldn't just show the saint performing miracles. The family's coat of arms would be prominently displayed at the saint's feet, woven into their robes or held in their hands like a cherished offering. A local lord named for St. George might have the dragon-slaying saint depicted holding a shield emblazoned with the lord's personal crest. This created a direct, visual link between the holy figure's divine power and the family's earthly might, suggesting a special relationship that set them apart from and above everyone else. The most famous example of this is the fleur-de-lis. While its origins are ancient, it became the undisputed symbol of French royalty, representing divine right and purity. You will find this symbol everywhere in French cathedrals, but its most potent placements are in direct association with the Virgin Mary. In windows and sculptures, Mary is often shown holding a scepter topped with the fleur-de-lis or surrounded by a halo of them. This was no accident. By linking their royal symbols so intimately with the Mother of Christ, the French monarchy was making an incontrovertible claim. Their authority was not just political, it was sacred, clean, and blessed by heaven. To oppose the king was not just treason, it was akin to sin. This fusion of symbols created a double-layered power. For the devout, it was a statement of faith. For the politically savvy, it was a brilliant, unassailable record of ancestry and a stark warning, a Ginst Chinese letter. The stones didn't just tell a family's story, they sanctified it, ensuring their legacy was protected by both law and what was believed to be divine will. This intentional hiding of symbols wasn't about keeping secrets from everyone. It was about creating a system of inclusion and exclusion, a visual hierarchy that separated the everyday worshipper from the privileged insider. Think about the physical experience of a medieval cathedral, the sheer, overwhelming scale of it. Your eyes are naturally drawn upward to the soaring vaults, forward to the brilliantly lit altar, or to the massive, narrative-filled stained glass windows. The architects and the patrons who worked with them understood human attention perfectly. They knew that the casual glance would never catch the small, deeply carved emblem on the underside of a misericord, the tip-up seat in the choir stalls where a cleric would rest during long services. Only the person sitting directly beneath it, or perhaps a curious child crawling on the floor, would ever spot it. This made the discovery of such a symbol a moment of personal revelation, a quiet unlocking of a secret that felt meant just for you, reinforcing your connection to the hidden order of things. The methods of concealment were as varied as they were clever. A family's crest might be integrated into the intricate stone foliage of a capital, becoming just another leaf in a stone forest unless you knew exactly which one to look for. Some symbols were carved upside down, a disorienting placement that signaled its purpose was not for general admiration but for specific recognition by those who had been instructed to find it. Others were placed in locations that required a literal journey to discover, at the top of a spiral staircase leading to a secluded gallery, or behind a heavy tapestry in a forgotten chantry chapel. This physical effort to find the symbol mirrored the social effort required to enter the elite circles it represented. It wasn't a password you simply spoke. It was a destination you had to earn the right to reach, turning the entire cathedral into a sprawling architectural puzzle box. This practice of hiding in plain sight draws a direct parallel to the concept of a password or a security question in our own digital lives. We don't announce our login credentials publicly. We whisper them into a microphone or type them discreetly into a field. In the same way, these stone passwords were meant to be discreetly pointed out, their location quietly shared from one trusted individual to another. For a traveling guild member, spotting the correct mason's mark in a hidden corner could be the key to finding lodging and work in a strange city, a silent token of professional brotherhood. For a nobleman visiting from a rival region, identifying an upside-down crest could signal a potential ally, a fellow initiate in the complex game of power. This intentional elusiveness elevated the symbols from mere records to active, functional tools of social and professional networking. Their power derived not from their beauty, but from their scarcity and the exclusivity of the knowledge they represented. For centuries, many of these stone passwords remained locked in shadow, their stories fading with the very stone they were carved into. But a quiet revolution is now underway in the halls of history and archaeology, one powered not by chisels but by pixels and processing power. The most exciting breakthroughs in understanding these hidden symbols are coming from a suite of non-invasive technologies that allow us to see the unseen. High-resolution 3D laser scanning can capture every minute contour of a worn capital or a high-up boss, creating a digital model that researchers can then manipulate on a screen, zooming in, enhancing shadows, and rotating the image to catch light from angles impossible to achieve in the physical building. This process has revealed masons' marks so faint they were completely unknown, like those recently mapped in the triforium of Canterbury Cathedral, allowing historians to identify individual artisans and trace their specific contributions to different parts of the structure for the very first time. Another powerful tool is photogrammetry, where hundreds of overlapping photographs of a single surface are stitched together by sophisticated software to create an incredibly detailed and precise 3D map. This technique is particularly effective on large, flat surfaces like tomb effigies or wall panels, where it can pick up the subtlest variations in depth that indicate where a tool once struck the stone. In some cases, this has revealed where a family's original emblem was carefully chiseled away and replaced with a rival symbol, documenting a historical power struggle that had been literally scratched out of the record. Perhaps the most magical of these technologies is multispectral imaging. By capturing light waves far beyond the visible spectrum like ultraviolet or infrared, this method can detect minute differences in the stone's composition that are utterly invisible to our eyes. A symbol that was once painted and has since faded away can sometimes be rediscovered because the ancient pigment, even if now gone, slightly altered the porosity of the stone underneath. Multispectral imaging can detect that change, effectively allowing us to see the ghost of the original paint and reclaim a splash of color and meaning lost for 500 years. The true power of these tools isn't just in examining one symbol at a time, but in building vast collaborative databases. Historians and archaeologists are now compiling digital libraries of thousands of these symbols from cathedrals, castles, and churches across Europe. By cross-referencing these marks, incredible patterns emerge. A specific mason's mark found in a cathedral in York might suddenly be matched to one in Cologne, rewriting our understanding of how these skilled artisans traveled and shared techniques across the continent. The distribution of a particular noble family's heraldic beast can be mapped, revealing the surprising geographic reach of their influence or the strategic marriages that extended their network. This big data approach to history is turning anecdotal evidence into statistical fact, allowing us to see the forest instead of just individual trees. We're no longer just guessing about medieval power dynamics. We are beginning to map them with empirical evidence pulled directly from the stones. This technological renaissance is doing more than just answering old questions. It's raising entirely new ones, proving that these silent stone passwords still have profound secrets to whisper to those who have the right tools to listen. Just as the rigid social order of the medieval world governed every aspect of daily life, from what you wore to whom you could marry, that same hierarchy was meticulously carved into the very stones of the cathedral. This wasn't a subtle suggestion, it was a deliberate, public, and permanent display of the social pecking order, a visual instruction manual for who mattered and who did not. The most powerful families, the royalty and the highest-ranking nobility, secured the prime real estate for their symbols. Their coats of arms and heraldic beasts were prominently displayed on the main facade, directly over the central portal where every single person entering the church would pass underneath them. They claimed space around the high altar, the most sacred and visually central point in the entire building, ensuring their earthly power was forever associated with divine proximity. It was the equivalent of having the best seats in the house permanently reserved for eternity. For families of slightly lesser stature, wealthy barons, influential knights, or prosperous merchants who had contributed a significant but not kingdom ransom sum, their emblems were relegated to secondary, yet still honorable, locations. You might find their symbols adorning the walls of a side chapel they funded, or perhaps carved into the stonework of a specific bay in the nave. Their marks were present, acknowledging their importance to the community and the building's construction, but they were never allowed to upstage the main patrons. Their place was literally to the side, a clear visual representation of their position in the feudal structure. Then there were the guild marks of the stonemasons and artisans themselves. While these craftsmen were highly respected and skilled, their social status remained that of laborers, albeit elite ones. Their marks, so essential for the internal functioning of the project, were almost always discreetly placed. You won't typically find a mason's signature on a front-facing cornerstone. Instead, they are hidden on the inner faces of stones, high up on a vault rib where only another mason would look, or on the underside of a slab. This placement wasn't a mark of shame, it was a reflection of a societal boundary. Their skill was invaluable, but their role was to build the stage, not to stand upon it. This spatial hierarchy was often reinforced by the sheer size and ornateness of the symbols themselves. A king's lion, carved into a tympanum over the main door, might be 3 feet tall, exquisitely detailed, and perhaps even originally gilded with real gold leaf to catch the sunlight. A baron's identical lion placed on a column in a side aisle would be smaller, simpler, and rendered in plain stone. The message was unmistakable. Even the same symbol could be made to express relative power through scale and splendor. Walking through a cathedral, a medieval person didn't need a guidebook to understand the social landscape. It was all laid out before them in an unspoken but universally understood stone-carved language of status, ensuring that everyone, from the highest bishop to the lowest peasant, was visually reminded of their designated place in the world. This careful curation of imagery reveals the cathedral's dual role as both a spiritual sanctuary and a powerful theater for the performance and perpetuation of earthly power. If you could walk through a cathedral built in the year 1100 and then step directly into one completed 400 years later, you wouldn't just notice a difference in the height of the ceilings or the play of light through the windows. You would be walking through two entirely different visual languages, each speaking volumes about the world that created it. The evolution of these stone passwords across centuries is a fascinating reflection of medieval society itself, a story of changing tastes, devastating crises, and intellectual rebirths all etched permanently into the stone. The journey begins in the Romanesque era with its characteristically massive, solid walls and rounded arches. The symbols from this period mirror the architecture. They are often robust, simple, and deeply geometric. Think of intricate knotwork, interlocking circles, and stylized, almost abstract animals. These designs were less about representing a specific noble family and more about universal spiritual concepts, the eternal nature of God, the interconnectedness of creation, the order of the universe. They were powerful in their simplicity, meant to inspire awe and contemplation in a world that was often harsh and uncertain. A mason's mark from this time might be a straightforward combination of a compass and a straight line, a proud signature of the artisan's core tools. Then came the Gothic Revolution, as engineering marvels allowed walls to soar and become vast canvases of stained glass. The symbols carved into them underwent a parallel transformation. This was the great age of heraldry, where noble families developed complex coats of arms to assert their identity. The symbols became more naturalistic, elaborate, and fiercely specific. Instead of a generic lion representing courage, you now had a precisely rendered lion rampant guardant argent on a field of gules, the unmistakable emblem of a particular king or duke. The stone passwords shifted from speaking a language of universal faith to a dialect of dynastic pride and political power. The immense cost and long timelines of these projects meant that a single cathedral could showcase this evolution within its own walls, with the older, simpler Romanesque foundations supporting a superstructure of flamboyant Gothic heraldry. However, this relentless drive toward complexity and grandeur was not destined to last. The 14th century brought unimaginable trauma to Europe with the dual horrors of the 100 Years' War and the Black Death. Society was shattered, economies collapsed, and a huge portion of the population, including skilled artisans, perished. Cathedral building didn't stop entirely, but it slowed to a crawl. The ambitious, multi-generational projects were paused or scaled back dramatically. This period of profound strain is visible in the stonework. Symbols become simpler again, not as a stylistic choice but out of sheer necessity. Heraldic devices might be rendered with less detail, or older carvings might be reused rather than commissioning new ones. The grandeur of the previous century gave way to a more pragmatic, subdued form of expression, a silent testament to a continent in recovery. Yet, from this crucible of suffering emerged a new dawn, the Renaissance, as Europe slowly recovered and new ideas began to flow, particularly from Italy. the symbolic language in northern cathedrals began to absorb these fresh influences. The strict, formalized language of Gothic heraldry started to share space with classical motifs. You might find a Tudor rose now carved alongside a delicately rendered acanthus leaf, a motif straight from ancient Greece and Rome. Portraits of patrons became more realistic, showing individuals with distinct features and personalities, rather than just idealized knights in armor. This signaled a monumental intellectual shift, a growing interest in humanism, in the individual, and in the classical past. The stone passwords began to track not just ancestry and power, but also the sweeping currents of intellectual history, proving their incredible adaptability and ensuring their continued relevance for a whole new era. Just as you would hear distinct dialects traveling from Paris to London to Rome, the stone passwords of medieval cathedrals speak in strong regional accents, each telling a unique story about the local culture, history, and political landscape that shaped them. This isn't a case of a single, uniform code used across the continent. It's a rich tapestry of symbolic dialects, and learning to distinguish them is like acquiring a key that unlocks deeper, more nuanced meanings hidden within the walls. The flamboyant, almost theatrical display of heraldry in a French Gothic cathedral like Amiens or Reims, for instance, stands in stark contrast to the more restrained and solemn approach found across the Channel in England. In France, the ambition was to overwhelm the senses and assert royal and divine power on a monumental scale. Heraldic shields are larger, more brightly painted, or would have been, and placed in the most prominent positions possible, often surrounded by intricate foliage and figures that draw even more attention to them. It's a bold, confident language of power meant to be seen and understood from a distance, reflecting a centralized monarchy keen to project its authority. Travel to England, however, and you'll often find a quieter, more integrated approach. In cathedrals like Salisbury or Durham, heraldic symbols are frequently woven into the fabric of the architecture rather than dominating it. They might be smaller, carved into the stone of a choir stall misericord, set into the floor as a grave slab, or nestled within the complex tracery of a window. This understatement isn't a sign of lesser importance. It often reflects a different political reality, one where powerful baronial families shared influence and where displays of individual might needed to be slightly more discreet, integrated into a collective whole. The message is still there, but it's delivered in a whisper rather than a shout, requiring you to come closer and look more carefully to understand the full story of patronage and influence. Venture south to Italy, and you encounter a symbolic language deeply informed by a different classical past. While Northern Europe was developing the Gothic style, Italian cathedrals like those in Siena or Orvieto often showcase a fascinating blend of medieval piety and a renewed interest in the art and motifs of ancient Rome. You might find a noble family's emblem positioned alongside carved figures that wouldn't look out of place on a Roman sarcophagus, graceful acanthus leaves, realistic laurel wreaths, and figures draped in classical robes. This incorporation of classical elements was a powerful way for powerful Italian city-states and merchant families to connect themselves to the legacy of the Roman Empire, asserting a different kind of legitimacy based on historical continuity and civic humanism rather than purely feudal rights. Their stone passwords spoke of an ancient, refined lineage, connecting their commercial and banking wealth to the grandeur of a classical past. Meanwhile, in the Germanic regions of the Holy Roman Empire, the symbolic vocabulary takes another fascinating turn, drawing heavily on earlier artistic traditions. Cathedrals like Cologne or Freiburg feature a stunning array of intricate knotwork, fierce, stylized animals, and interlaced patterns that clearly show the enduring influence of Viking, Celtic, and Arthurian art. These motifs, with their complex, looping designs that have no beginning and no end, carried deep meanings of eternity, destiny, and the interconnectedness of all things. A dragon or a wolf carved in this distinctive style might serve as a family emblem, but its visual language roots that family in a broader, older cultural identity that predates the strict rules of French heraldry. This regional flavor reminds us that the stone passwords were not imposed from a single center but grew organically from the ground up, reflecting local myths, artistic traditions, and a sense of identity that was deeply tied to the land and its history. This incredible diversity means that a single symbol could have a shifting meaning depending on where you stood in Europe. The lion, one of the most common heraldic beasts, is a perfect example. In the context of a French cathedral, a golden lion on a red field almost certainly refers to the royal power of the monarchy. But that same lion carved onto a tomb in an English cathedral might represent the personal courage of a specific knight or the emblem of a local earl with no direct connection to the crown. In a Germanic church, a more stylized serpentine lion might be part of a local legend or a symbolic guardian against evil spirits, its meaning decoded through folklore rather than heraldic lore. This is why context and location are everything. You cannot simply look up a symbol in a universal dictionary. You have to understand the local dialect, the regional history, and the specific cultural conversations that were happening when the chisel struck the stone. This rich variation doesn't make the code harder to break. It makes the story infinitely more interesting, revealing a medieval Europe that was not a monolith but a vibrant, diverse, and often contradictory tapestry of competing identities, all vying for a permanent place in the sacred stone. While the grand narratives of medieval power were often dominated by kings and knights, the silent language of stone holds a quieter, more nuanced story, one that reveals how women of influence navigated a patriarchal world to leave their own indelible mark. To assume that these stone passwords only recorded the deeds of men would be to miss a crucial layer of the history. Noble women, particularly those who brought immense wealth or strategic alliances into a marriage, were absolutely vital to the dynastic ambitions of their families, and their presence is beautifully encoded in the heraldry and symbolism of the cathedral walls. The most common method of this commemoration was through the sophisticated visual language of marital heraldry. When a woman from a powerful family married, her father's coat of arms was not discarded. It was permanently united with her husband's. This was most often shown through a practice called impalement, where the shield was divided vertically with the husband's arms on the dexter side, the right-hand side from the perspective of the knight holding the shield, which is the left to the viewer, and the wife's paternal arms on the sinister side. This created a single, unified emblem that publicly declared the union of two great houses, making the wife's lineage an equal part of the couple's public identity. For an even more powerful alliance, especially if the wife was a great heiress, the shield might be quartered, divided into 4 or more sections that alternated between the arms of the husband and the wife, visually blending their bloodlines into a new, combined dynasty for their descendants. Beyond this formal blending of shields, some women exercised direct patronage, using their own considerable wealth to fund specific elements of a cathedral's construction. A wealthy duchess or queen might personally endow a chantry chapel where priests would say daily masses for the salvation of her soul and those of her ancestors. In return, she could dictate the symbolism that adorned it. This is where we find more personal, less formal symbols emerging from the shadow of strict heraldry. A woman might choose to incorporate her favorite personal device, a star, a particular breed of bird, a specific type of flower like a columbine or a gilliflower into the carvings or the stained glass of her chapel. These motifs acted as a more intimate signature, a glimpse into her personal identity beyond her role as a wife and mother. The legendary Elena of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, is a perfect example. While her official heraldry would have been tied to her husbands, the kings of France and England, her personal patronage and influence are often associated with plant symbolism, particularly the intricate, curling foliage and botanical motifs that appear in the architectural detailing of regions associated with her, like Poitiers. These naturalistic elements can be read as a subtle but persistent assertion of her own distinctive taste and authority, a reminder that her power and identity were not entirely subsumed by the men in her life. These carvings, though often overlooked, are profoundly significant. In a society that offered women limited legal and political agency, they provided a sanctioned avenue for self-representation and remembrance. They ensured that a woman's crucial role in building a dynasty through her bloodline, her wealth, and her strategic intelligence was not forgotten. She became a permanent part of the story her family was telling in stone. Finding these symbols requires a more careful look, often in the side chapels and quieter corners funded by female patrons, but they reward the search with a richer, more complete understanding of the medieval world. They remind us that the tracking of ancestry and power was a collaborative endeavor, a delicate dance between male and female ambition that together shaped the legacies we can still see today. This evidence of female agency, however filtered through the constraints of the time, adds incredible depth and humanity to our reading of the stone passwords, proving that history is always more complex and more interesting than it first appears. Beyond the bustling nave and the public displays of power, the cathedral offered a more private yet equally permanent space for the elite, its role as the final resting place. For the noble families who had funded its construction, securing a burial site within the sacred walls was the ultimate privilege, a final, powerful step in cementing their legacy. This was far more than a simple grave. It was a carefully curated stage for one last performance of status, designed to ensure the deceased was not only remembered by the living but also favorably received in the afterlife. The funerary art that adorned these tombs and chapels represents some of the most poignant and explicit uses of stone passwords, turning the solemn act of memorialization into a sophisticated language of lineage, virtue, and divine negotiation. At the heart of this tradition lies the tomb effigy itself. We might see a knight carved in stone, lying in eternal repose, clad in his full armor, but look closer. Every detail is a deliberate message. The shield resting by his side isn't blank. It displays his full coat of arms in meticulous detail. The surcoat over his armor is emblazoned with his family's heraldic beast. The hilt of his sword might bear a personal monogram or another smaller emblem. This isn't a generic soldier. This is Sir William de Percy, and every person who walks past his tomb for the next 500 years will know it. The effigy acts as a permanent stand-in for the man, a stone ambassador for his family's name, ensuring that his identity and his claim to noble status endure long after his flesh has turned to dust. But the family's statement didn't stop with the effigy. The walls of the chantry chapel built around the tomb would often be a canvas for a much broader symbolic story. Here, the carvings might expand beyond simple heraldry to illustrate the family's claimed virtues or their divine connections. You might find carvings of oak leaves and acorns, symbolizing strength and endurance through generations. Vines and grapes could represent faith and the blood of Christ, suggesting the family's piety. Most powerfully, the patron saint of the family might be depicted in a wall panel, almost acting as a holy sponsor, their stone gaze looking benevolently upon the tomb as if to personally escort this worthy soul into paradise. This created a powerful visual argument for the deceased's character, suggesting a life so virtuous that sainthood itself was within reach. The most crucial function of these symbols, however, was spiritual. This is where the concept of the stone password becomes truly literal. Medieval belief held that the prayers of the living could aid souls undergoing purification in purgatory. Wealthy families would endow a chantry, essentially funding a priest or a group of priests in perpetuity, whose sole job was to say daily masses for the souls of the patrons and their ancestors. The symbols carved on and around the tomb were the direct link to this spiritual economy. They were the identifiers that told the priest exactly who to pray for. A specific arrangement of heraldic symbols on a tomb chest was like a name tag for God and his saints, ensuring that the spiritual benefits of those endless masses were correctly routed to the intended soul. It was a permanent, foolproof login credential for divine grace, etched in stone to never be forgotten or misdirected. Consider the tomb of a typical knight, not of royal blood but of significant local standing. His effigy shows him in armor, his hands pressed together in prayer. At his feet lies a lion, his family's symbol, but flanking his head might be small, delicately carved figures of Saint George and the Virgin Mary. This visual arrangement is a profound theological claim. It suggests that the knight's earthly courage, symbolized by his armor and his lion, has earned him the patronage of the ultimate soldier saint, while his piety has won him the favor of the Mother of God. The message to every viewer is clear. This man is not just dead, he is assuredly in heaven, and his family's emblem is his eternal proof of passage. This practice masterfully turned the inevitable reality of death into one final, triumphant arena for displaying power and ancestry, using the silent, enduring language of stone to make a claim that was meant to last until the end of time itself. Yet, even as these intricate stone languages reached their peak of sophistication, the world around them was beginning to change in ways that would render them obsolete. The slow decline of this centuries-old tradition wasn't caused by a single event, but by a powerful convergence of political, religious, technological, and economic shifts that together reshaped European society. The rise of strong, centralized monarchies, particularly in nations like France, England, and Spain, systematically stripped away the power of the local nobility. Why would a duke go to the immense expense of carving his family's crest into a cathedral wall if his authority now flowed directly from the king in a distant capital, rather than from his own ancient lineage and landed estates? The political currency of these symbols was devalued overnight. Family emblems didn't disappear, but their function transformed from vital claims of independent power into mere decorations or acknowledgements of a rank that was now subservient to the crown. The stone passwords were losing their political potency, becoming echoes of a fading feudal world rather than active tools in a living power structure. This political revolution was followed by an even more profound spiritual and cultural earthquake, the Reformation. Sparked in the early 16th century, the Protestant movement, led by figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin, advocated for a radical simplification of Christian worship. They viewed the lavish statuary, stained glass, and intricate carvings of Catholic cathedrals not as aids to devotion, but as idolatrous distractions, what they called popish superstitions. In regions that embraced Protestantism, such as much of England under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, and across northern Europe, this led to waves of iconoclasm. Statues were decapitated, stained glass windows depicting saints were smashed, and carved reliefs were defaced with hammers and chisels. In this new religious climate, commissioning new heraldic symbols for a church was not just politically unnecessary, it was theologically suspect. The very canvas on which the stone passwords were written was being systematically erased, and a new preference for plain whitewashed walls and clear glass meant there was no place for such personalized, secular narratives in the house of God. At the very same time, a technological innovation was revolutionizing how information was recorded and preserved: the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. For centuries, visual symbols in stone had been one of the few permanent and public ways to document lineage, contracts, and ownership. But why go through the immense labor and expense of having a stonemason carve a complex coat of arms when you could now have a scribe and soon a printing press produce hundreds of identical, precise, and portable paper pedigrees? Written records, charters, and printed family trees became the new standard for tracking ancestry and legal rights. They were easier to create, update, and distribute. This shift from a visual, public language of power to a written, private one was monumental. The stone password was replaced by the paper document, a change that made record-keeping more efficient but also less democratic, as it moved information from the public wall into the private archive, accessible only to those who could read. Finally, the economic reality of cathedral construction itself was changing. The great age of cathedral building, which had boomed from the 12th to the 14th centuries, had largely passed. The immense capital and decades of labor required were increasingly directed toward other endeavors: palaces for absolute monarchs, universities, and global exploration. When new churches were built in the Renaissance and Baroque styles, the aesthetic favored classical harmony, mathematical proportion, and uniform elegance. The goal was often a cohesive artistic vision, not a patchwork of personalized chapels funded by competing nobles. Patronage became more centralized under the crown or the church hierarchy, leading to designs that reflected a single authority rather than a messy collage of individual family ambitions. The personalized touch of the stonemason, with his unique mark and his patron's specific instructions, was gradually replaced by the anonymous, standardized work of large workshops following a master architect's unified plan. The symbols that remained became more about general artistry and less about specific, functional tracking, marking the end of an era where stone itself was used as a living, breathing ledger of human history. The allure of a hidden secret is a powerful force, and over the centuries, the true purpose of these stone-carved symbols has often been shrouded in layers of speculation, romanticism, and outright myth. It's a natural human tendency to look at an ancient, cryptic mark and imbue it with a sense of mystery far beyond its original, often quite practical, function. This is precisely what happened to the humble mason's mark. These simple geometric signatures, designed for quality control and artisan identification, have been frequently misappropriated by later generations seeking a more thrilling narrative. Perhaps the most persistent and widespread misconception links these medieval guild marks directly to the secret symbols of the Freemasons, a fraternal organization that emerged centuries later. While it's true that speculative Freemasonry drew inspiration from the lore and imagery of the operative stonemasons, the direct connection is tenuous at best. The marks on cathedral walls were not codes for occult knowledge or mystical rites. They were the professional signatures of working craftsmen, their equivalent of a carpenter branding his furniture or a painter signing his canvas. To interpret them as anything more is to project a modern, romanticized view onto a medieval reality that was far more concerned with practicalities than with esoteric mysteries. This drift into fantasy was heavily fueled by the Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries. Writers and artists of this era, fascinated by an imagined, dramatic past, often looked at the Middle Ages through a lens of Gothic intrigue and sentimental nostalgia. In their novels and poems, they transformed the hard-working, pragmatic stonemason into a mysterious, almost wizard-like figure, a guardian of ancient secrets. This literary trend gave birth to a whole host of popular but entirely fictional myths that persist to this day. How many stories have we heard about secret maps to the Holy Grail encoded in the floor tiles of charters, or about the Knights Templar hiding their vast treasure and leaving behind a trail of symbols for initiates to follow? While these tales are wonderfully engaging, they belong to the realm of fiction, not history. They were born from a desire to see the past as a more exciting, more mysterious place than it likely was for the people actually living in it. This is why it is so crucial to anchor our understanding in solid archaeological and historical evidence. The real story these stones tell, one of social ambition, artistic skill, economic transaction, and political maneuvering, is in many ways more fascinating than any fictional treasure hunt because it is true. It connects us to the genuine lives, concerns, and ingenuity of real people. The symbols were indeed a code, but not a mystical one. They were a functional, sophisticated system of communication for their specific time and place, intended to be read by contemporary peers, other nobles, rival families, guild members, and heralds. They were not designed as a grand puzzle for us to solve centuries later. By stripping away the layers of modern myth, we don't diminish the importance of these carvings, we actually honor them. We allow them to speak in their own authentic voice, telling us about the complex, gritty, and ambitious world that created them, rather than forcing them to conform to our own fantasies. This clearer, evidence-based perspective is essential if we are to have a respectful and accurate dialogue with the past, which in turn allows us to approach the modern study of these symbols with a greater sense of ethical responsibility. Deciphering the messages left in medieval stone is not just an academic exercise, it's an endeavor that demands a deep sense of ethical responsibility. These cathedrals are not frozen museums. They are living, breathing centers of worship and community that have held continuous significance for nearly a millennium. When we approach a carved symbol with the intent to study it, we must do so with the understanding that we are interacting with someone else's sacred space. The very act of interpretation requires a delicate balance, a commitment to understanding the context in which these marks were made without imposing our own modern frameworks upon them. It's the difference between listening to a story and rewriting it to suit our own narrative. One of the most immediate ethical challenges arises from the methods we use to uncover these secrets. Advanced technologies like 3D scanning and photogrammetry are non-invasive wonders, but other techniques can be more contentious. Taking physical samples of stone or pigment, or even using certain lighting techniques during services, can be seen as a violation by a congregation that sees the building as their spiritual home. The question becomes, does the academic value of potentially discovering a faded coat of arms outweigh the potential disruption to the devotional life of the community that worships there daily? Most ethical historians and archaeologists today argue that it does not, advocating for a look but don't touch approach whenever possible, prioritizing the cathedral's primary function as a house of prayer. There's also a significant risk of misrepresentation by focusing too narrowly on one aspect of these symbols. While our video has explored the fascinating role of these carvings in tracking power and ancestry, an overemphasis on this political dimension can accidentally overshadow the genuine, heartfelt devotional intent behind them. For every nobleman who wanted to assert his dominance, there was likely a sincere desire to honor God and secure a place in heaven for his soul and the souls of his ancestors. Reducing a beautifully carved patron saint holding a family's shield to a mere power play ignores the complex medieval world, you where faith, power, and identity were utterly inseparable. A truly ethical interpretation acknowledges this duality rather than simplifying it. Furthermore, we must guard against the temptation to judge the past by the standards of the present. It is easy to look at these displays of heraldic wealth and see only a story of oppression, of a powerful elite flaunting their status over an impoverished populace. While there is truth in that dynamic, applying a purely modern, socio-critical lens can prevent us from understanding the medieval mind on its own terms. For the people of the time, this social hierarchy was part of a divine order. The noble family's patronage of the cathedral was not just a boast, it was their Christian duty, a fulfillment of the role God had assigned them. This doesn't excuse inequality, but it helps us understand that the symbols communicated a more complex idea of obligation and responsibility alongside the clear messages of power. This is why the gold standard for modern ethical scholarship is collaboration. The most respected research projects now involve roundtables that include not just historians and archaeologists, but also current church leaders, local community historians, and preservationists. This collaborative model ensures that any study is conducted with consent, that the interpretations are enriched by local knowledge and tradition, and that the findings are shared in a way that respects the site's ongoing legacy. It transforms the process from one of extraction, mining the building for data, to one of conversation, a dialogue between the past and the present that honors all voices involved. This approach guarantees that our relentless curiosity about history serves to deepen our respect for its living descendants, ensuring that these stone passwords are not just decoded, but are also honored for the profound, multi-layered cultural treasures they truly are. This ancient impulse to embed identity and meaning into our built environment never truly vanished. It simply evolved, finding new expression in the sweeping curves of Art Nouveau, the bold lines of modernism, and even the sleek glass facades of contemporary architecture. The legacy of those medieval stone passwords is alive and well, a continuous thread connecting the master masons of Chartres to the visionary artists of today. Consider Antoni Gaudi's magnificent Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, a project that itself has spanned generations. While its form is radically organic and unique, its spirit is deeply medieval. Gaudi populated his masterpiece with a forest of symbolic meaning turtles and tortoises supporting columns to represent the stability of earth and sea, intricate fruit-laden spires symbolizing the gifts of the spirit, and a facade telling the story of Christ in a way that any medieval pilgrim would instantly understand. It is a modern cathedral that speaks the old language of symbolic storytelling, proving that the desire to encode profound narratives in stone is as potent now as it was 800 years ago. This isn't just confined to religious structures. Look at any major cityscape and you'll see the echoes of heraldry in the logos and branding etched into the glass and steel of corporate headquarters. A modern tech giant's sleek Apple or a social media platform's stylized bird functions with the exact same purpose as a lion rampant on a knight's shield. It asserts identity, denotes quality, and commands recognition and loyalty. We may have traded stone for neon and stained glass for digital displays, but the underlying psychology is unchanged. Our skyscrapers are our modern castles, and their logos are our coats of arms, broadcasting corporate lineage and power in a visual shorthand understood across the globe. Even in public architecture, this language persists. A new library or city hall might incorporate a simplified version of the town's historic seal into its wrought iron gates or the pattern of its brickwork, a nod to local history that roots a modern building in a longer story, much like a noble family would reference an ancient ancestor in their heraldic quarterings. The tradition of the Mason's mark has also found its contemporary equivalent. While we may not find chiseled signatures on concrete pillars, architects and artists continue to leave their subtle Easter eggs for the observant. The architect Frank Gehry is known for his sculptural, deconstructivist buildings, but he also imbues them with a personal touch, a signature style so distinct it acts as its own kind of mark. Street artists like Banksy use stencils and public walls to make powerful, often hidden in plain sight social commentaries, their anonymous identities itself becoming a modern legend, much like the mysterious masters of the medieval guilds. And in our digital worlds, this instinct has exploded. We craft elaborate avatars, design personal emblems for our social media profiles, and leave digital signatures on everything we create online. A hashtag is the modern Mason's mark, a way to tag our work, find our community, and assert our presence in a vast, invisible cathedral of information. This direct line from the physical to the digital shows that our fundamental need to say, "I was here, this is mine, this is me," is a hardwired part of the human experience. Understanding this direct lineage does more than just satisfy historical curiosity. It reframes our entire relationship with the spaces we inhabit. It reminds us that the buildings around us are not mute, functional boxes. They are conversations, they are layers of decisions, identities, and stories stacked one upon the other. The medieval cathedral was a living archive, and in a way, so is our modern city. The next time you walk down a street, you can choose to see just glass, steel, and concrete. Or you can choose to read it. You can look for the corporate crests, the architectural signatures, the historical nods in the decorative frieze above a door. You are surrounded by a living language of symbols, a continuous evolution of the stone password that connects you directly to every individual who ever carved their mark into something, hoping it would last. This enduring power of the symbol proves that while our tools and materials change, our deepest human desires for identity, belonging, and legacy are truly timeless. Perhaps the most profound aspect of these stone passwords isn't their historical intrigue, but the deeply human impulse they represent, a yearning to understand where we come from and to leave a mark that says we were here. As we unravel the stories of lions carved into choir stalls and masons' signatures hidden on vaulted ceilings, it's almost impossible not to draw a parallel to our own modern quest for connection. Today, we might not commission a chapel to immortalize our name, but we scroll through digital family trees, send away DNA test kits that promise to reveal our ethnic makeup, and carefully preserve heirlooms like a great-grandmother's wedding ring or a faded photograph. These are our modern-day stone carvings. They serve the same fundamental purpose, to anchor us in a narrative larger than ourselves, to provide a sense of continuity in a fleeting world, and to satisfy that innate curiosity about the chain of events and people that led to our very existence. That moment of recognition is what transforms history from a dry academic subject into a living, breathing conversation across time. Maybe you've walked through an old church or even a historic public building and found your gaze lingering on a worn insignia above a doorway or a peculiar symbol etched into a cornerstone. Before this exploration, it might have been just a curious decoration, but now you possess a new lens. You can look at that mark and see the potential for a story, a local benefactor asserting their family's civic pride, a guild of craftsmen guaranteeing their work, a subtle signal meant for a select few. That simple shift in perspective turns a casual visit into a form of time travel. You're no longer just a passive observer. You become an active reader of a hidden language, connecting with the ambitions, fears, and pride of individuals who lived centuries ago. Their desire to be remembered resonates with our own, creating a powerful, empathetic bridge across the ages. This connection invites a wonderfully personal reflection. The medieval noble who had his emblem placed beside a saint wasn't so different from someone today proudly displaying their family's military medals or a university diploma on the wall. It's all a way of visually crafting our identity, of showing the world, and reminding ourselves of our values, our achievements, and our lineage. Whether it's a coat of arms in stone or a curated photo album on social media, we are all engaged in the same essential act of storytelling. We are all leaving our own version of Mason's marks on the world, small signatures that say, "I helped build this, I was part of this." Recognizing this universal drive allows us to engage with history not as a collection of dusty facts, but as a continuous tapestry of human experience, where we ourselves are adding new threads with every generation we raise and every story we choose to preserve. So as our journey through these silent stone narratives comes to a close, let's gather the key threads we've unraveled. We began by stepping into the medieval mindset, understanding that in a world where few could read, imagery was a primary language, a vital tool for communication, devotion, and asserting one's place in a rigidly structured universe. From this foundation, we saw how skilled stonemason guilds, working under the direction of wealthy patrons, became the master scribes of this visual dialect, blending sacred iconography with secular ambition to create a permanent record in stone. We then learned to read this language ourselves, deciphering the meanings behind heraldic beasts like lions and eagles, the practical signatures of Mason's marks, and the powerful fusion of family emblems with religious scenes, all designed to convey messages of power, piety, and identity. We discovered that these symbols were far more than decorative vanity. They were active, functional tools in the complex machinery of medieval society. They acted as a form of public ledger for the powerful, a way to track lineage through generations with subtle changes to coats of arms that denoted marriages, heirs, and conquered land. They served as visual passwords, granting access to privileged spaces or signaling alliances in times of political turmoil, effectively turning the cathedral into a secure network for the elite. We saw this system in action through specific cases like the Burgess Cathedral, where the Duc de Berry's personal emblems of the bear and swan were woven throughout the fabric of the building, creating a lasting autobiography of his influence and taste. Furthermore, we explored how these carvings were a battleground for political messaging, with rival families competing for prominence and victorious forces imposing their symbols as acts of psychological domination, making the stones themselves a permanent record of conflict and conquest. Our exploration also revealed the incredible diversity of this practice, from the flamboyant heraldry of French Gothic cathedrals to the more restrained and integrated symbols found in England, and the classical influences evident in Italian structures. This regional variation reminds us that medieval Europe was not a monolith but a tapestry of distinct cultures, each using this symbolic language in its own unique dialect. We also uncovered the often overlooked role of women in this story, whose lineage and patronage were recorded through marital heraldry and personal devotional symbols, adding a crucial layer of depth to our understanding of dynastic ambition. The discussion then turned to the modern era, where cutting-edge technology like 3D scanning and multispectral imaging is acting as a digital key, unlocking faded secrets and allowing us to map the migratory patterns of artisans and the reach of noble influence with unprecedented clarity, all while ethical considerations remind us to approach these living monuments with respect and collaboration. Ultimately, the story of the stone passwords is a testament to a universal and enduring human desire to leave a mark to be remembered and to connect ourselves to something larger than our own fleeting lives. The nobles and masons of the Middle Ages used the most permanent medium they had, stone, to encode their stories, ensuring their names, their families, and their authority would echo through the centuries. We may use different tools today: digital archives, DNA tests, social media profiles, but the impulse is identical. We are all engaged in the same fundamental act of storytelling, of crafting an identity and seeking a legacy. These silent symbols in cathedral walls are a powerful bridge across time, reminding us that our deepest yearnings for connection and remembrance are a timeless part of the human experience, forever etched not just in stone, but in the very heart of who we are. The hidden symbols in medieval cathedrals are far more than decorative art. They are a profound testament to humanity's enduring desire to record lineage, assert power, and connect with something greater than ourselves. As we've journeyed through the world of stone passwords together, we've uncovered a reality where every carefully chiseled mark held layered meaning, every heraldic beast whispered a story of ambition, and every soaring cathedral functioned as a living, breathing archive of human identity. These silent witnesses to history, standing for centuries, now challenge us to look closer at the world we inhabit, to seek out the stories embedded not just in stone, but in the very architecture of our daily lives, from the logos on our skyscrapers to the digital footprints we leave behind. I truly hope this exploration has given you a new lens through which to see these ancient spaces. The next time you find yourself fortunate enough to step into a historic cathedral or even an old civic building, I encourage you to pause and let your gaze wander. Look beyond the obvious grandeur, search for the small, the hidden, the seemingly insignificant, that odd geometric scratch on a pillar, that worn animal carved into the end of a pew, that faded shield high on a wall. Each one is a potential stone password, waiting for a curious mind to unlock its story. I would love to hear about what you discover. Have you ever spotted a mysterious symbol in an old building? Did you uncover its meaning? Please share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation as a community of curious explorers. And as you go about your day, consider this final reflection. How are we, in our own modern way, leaving marks for future generations? Our methods have evolved from chisels to code, from stone walls to social media feeds, but the core human impulse remains beautifully unchanged. We all share that deep-seated need to say, "I was here, my life had meaning, remember me." The story of the stone passwords is ultimately our story, a timeless narrative about the quest for legacy and connection. Thank you so much for joining me on this fascinating journey into the past. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery with me, don't forget to subscribe for more adventures where we decode history's greatest secrets, one story at a